Good, thank you. I don't have to talk loud at all with that. That's good. Well, I wanted to lift up one of our missionaries this week. On the back of your handout today, we have a nice young man who's been here to our church. He's going to a restricted access nation, so we don't give his name or his mission field. But this is what we've been talking about with Bible translation. Faith cometh by hearing, hearing by the word of God. How can they know except they hear, and how can they hear except somebody preach? We have to send somebody that can take the Bible and give words of life and truth. And a lot of countries don't have an accurate Bible in their own language. We have several Bible translators that we're supporting now. This fellow is called to that specifically as a young man and did 10 years of extra training. I mean, he has more degrees than a thermometer. This is a smart guy, and you can read about him on the back. I've read his letter. He's working in a country, it's so interesting, they have a majority language and a minority language, the language of the few. And the people that he's trying to reach are the people that speak the minority language of this country. He's learned the majority language, but God's put it in his heart to go after some people that will require additional training. And he'll be 80 to 89 years old by the time he gets all this done. But his heart's right, and I think God's going to take care of him. And it's just a very interesting reading on the man on the back here, and we have supported him since September 2020. So again, if you don't plan to go to Bible college and study linguistics and get a BA and a master's and a PhD and all sorts of things and go off to a country and find one where you can be specifically God's man or God's woman to translate things, that would be something that you'll want to support. We'll go to 1 Samuel today. We're in a series, if you're just joining us, on exploring people of the Bible. This is lesson 48. Next week, David and his giant, lesson 49. I thought there was about 50 lessons, but this just seems to be the song that never ends. This is really good. John Phillips just could write one of these series just on his nightstand at night, because he just seemed to be able to crank these out. The title of the message today fits with last week's lesson on Eli the priest, Hannah and her faith. John MacArthur wrote 2 books a few years ago that emphasized God's dealing with men and women. One was named 12 Ordinary Men, and God uses ordinary men to do extraordinary things for his son and kind of overcomes their ordinariness. Well, in Middle Eastern culture, in biblical times, women were not very greatly thought of. So the next book is 12 Extraordinary Women that despite the country they were born in, that they moved into the left lane, dropped it into 5th gear, and excelled. And Hannah is one of those. We'd look at a country, we'd look at a situation, we'd look at something on CNN or Fox News and say, we need to give Henry Kissinger vitamins. We need to bring back General Patton. We need a military or industrial or diplomatic solution. And God says, I think I'll send a baby, and if I send a baby, I need to send a godly woman. And they say, are you sure that's what you're going to do? Yep, I'm God. That's what I'm going to do. And just watch out here. So the book of 1 Samuel shows us in a country that's like ours. It's on the decline. It begins with failure. It ends with failure, the book of 1 Samuel. You can read in Judges 21:25 the general tone and tenor of that nation. It says, and this is prophetic, it seems like today, in those days, there was no king in Israel. This is a disaster. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Have you noticed people on TV saying, I want to share my truth? Truth, by definition, has to be exclusive or it's not truth. Nothing wrong with your opinion, but it doesn't qualify to even be considered truth if you think it's my truth. The times were of decay and defeat and disorganization. Compare America today. I watched, my wife went shopping with my youngest daughter. I was on the dog patrol. The dogs went to sleep. So I watched Turner Classic Movies. My favorite movie almost, Alvin York. A wonderful movie. Godly people, wonderful, courageous people that won a war and deferred praise. And I thought, I literally at the end of that was in tears. I thought, why in the world did we turn away from this? Well, they did too. Decay, defeat, disorganization, no authority, no spirituality, no continuity, no respect of history, nothing in which man could enjoy or God could delight. The Israelites then were like modern Americans, Christian or not Christian. They did what they pleased, and you better not get in their way or they'll create a law and have you thrown in jail. Instead of salt and light, instead of leading the way, God's people then were poured into the same molds that the world had been formed to impact them. Romans 12:2 says, "Be not conformed to this world, but rather transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you can prove that which is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God." They had no interest in that. They wanted to do what they wanted to do. They wanted what they wanted when they wanted. And the same sad conditions abound, John Phillips says, in the Church of Jesus Christ today. We walk with our heads bent because we're accustomed to defeat. We are acclimatized to disorganization and to declension. We think that's normal. Here's a good test. Are you more stunned and surprised and astonished when someone is saved at a service than when they're not? There were times in the Christian church they would have been just in shock if God didn't visibly do something during a service. We think it's normal that our children are probably going to be bored with what we're trying to tell them, and it's kind of a miracle if they show any interest. Well, hard to getting young people to go to church. That's just how it is. Cue sigh. That's how it is. We march off defiantly into the world. As they march off defiantly into the world, we shrug our shoulders and say, that's just the way it is. Guess what? 1 Samuel was in a day as dark as ours. 1 Samuel was in a day where memories of the past and signs of declension were just as marked as ours. The priesthood was corrupt. My father, you have been praying for him so long, but it's just like Satan always. I remember it began with Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. He just had a field day with that. It was kind of unusual back then because evangelists were respected, and when they fell, my dad he said, there you go, it's all a fake. Not only the priesthood corrupt, but the high priest was a feeble old man who was not adequate for this job. He did what he could, but he should have retired years before, and even worse, the next generation was to be cursed with Eli's rotten, worthless sons, Hophni and Phinehas, who abused people, not just were ineffective, but were absolutely predatorial. The people were therefore, looking at this, demoralized, depressed, and the enemies of Israel were oppressive. And that's how we are. It seems like 30 years ago, America was very well thought of, and not now. In dark days, we can't worry about this. God's sovereign over history. We're to shine bright the darker it gets. And I will encourage you, if you live just a normal Christian life, just a grade B, 75 on a curve type life, people will be stunned as dark as our world is today. It's a great opportunity to shine because the darker it is, the more that light is appreciated. Well, guess what? God's not dead. He's still on his throne. Into this gloom, God brought a godly, shining, sparkling young woman named Hannah. If you need a name for maybe one of your grandkids, this would be one that would bring very good thoughts. Thank God for such women. They pop up in history. I'll give you a parallel, not numerically, because this woman had a lot. Susanna Wesley, i.e. John and Charles Wesley, mother of John and Charles. She was used of God to be used by them to bring revival and a God-saving, nation-changing revival to England years later. And they testified till their dying day that she was their first and best Bible teacher, and they built their ministries on her foundation. Now, she had a husband who history does not treat very well. He was just angry and furious, and he was faithful. I'm sure he's in heaven, but his personality didn't help them well. Their mother was the one that really gave them their chance and their ability. Her husband, this is a true story, was a fiery preacher, and I think maybe he preached too hard because after a sermon one night, the people left the church and went and set his house on fire and tried to burn it down. They'd had about enough of him. Well, guess what? Everybody got out except John Wesley, who got confused. 6 years old, he went up on a dresser, and they finally got him out. Literally, he said, I was as a brand plucked from the burning. Charles, who was a songwriter, a good preacher, but also tremendous songwriting, Fanny Crosby level songwriter. Charles was born premature and to all apparent medical of the day, he was a stillborn. He was not breathing. He was not moving. Hope was lost. Again, the mother said no. She thought she detected a faint heartbeat. She wrapped him in the soft wool, she said, and worked on him. And finally, he roused up and lived about 80 or 90 years. I don't remember exactly how long he lived, but his mother was the one. Both John and Charles had felt that they were spared by God to be used by God in a dim and a dark age. See if this doesn't sound like a place where we live. England, in their day, the theater was decadent, obscene. The government, the royalty was immoral, irresponsible. The priesthood, the parish priests were drunken, card-playing sots. They just chased hounds all day and chased women or each other all night. They were absolutely worthless. Atheism, fueled by Hume and Gibbon and Voltaire, flourished. It's an old rotten piece of ground, and they flourished in that. In 1736, just 3 years before the Methodist revival began, every sixth house on the streets of London was a gin house. Their motto was they'd get you drunk for a penny and dead drunk for two. They'd give you a bottle and a blanket to wake you up and send you home with the hair of the dog that bit you. They just had a whole, and you know what? They put out little tables for the children to get their gin and to get them addicted to it, because the children had to work 12 or 15 hours a day. There was no labor laws in those days. England was a rotten place. We think of Dickens' England. This was before that. The shorter tables were set up so the children could get their coin. Religion had no response. It hit rock bottom. John Phillips says rampant immorality was openly defended and justified, and it was assumed more than granted that Christianity was a joke, that it had its day and was gone and was dead. What's the point? America in our day, England in that day, Israel in the days of the king or the judges, and the 18th century England were on the downgrade, a greased skid running toward hell. And you know what God did? He didn't send F-35s. Praise God for F-35s. He didn't send A-10s over to Syria to work on them. We appreciate our military, and that's a good answer for lots of problems. We appreciate our government. We appreciate diplomacy. These are all important things, and God raised up good people for that. God sent a woman. God sent Susanna Wesley, and through her, tremendous blessing to England. He sent to Israel a Hannah, and maybe somewhere in today he's sending a young woman. My partner, Dr. Bird, remember Dr. Bird we had a two-person practice for years, and now we're in this big group. But her daughter, Hannah, really wants to be an apologist. She's got her own YouTube website. She's got all these things, and she goes to college classes and talks to people, and she does mock trials and debates, and she's really gifted in that. And it doesn't have to be somebody that is a debater or anything, but God's going to send people, and when he does, if they're human beings, they come from a woman, and so you've got to have a godly woman in this line of the seed. You have to. So we're going to consider Hannah's story, 4 parts. We'll see that it progresses, looks like down and finally up, from barrenness to bitterness to brokenness, and then at the end to blessedness. First thing I want you to see, you've had sadness in your life. Our family has too. She did too. Look in 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verses 1 and 2. It says, "Now there was a certain man of Ramah famed Zophim of Mount Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zoph, an Ephrathite. He had 2 wives. I want you to know I went to pronouncebible.com last night to try to figure out how to pronounce this other woman's name. Hannah is one of his wives' name. The other one was Peninnah. Now, that's not how I would have said it, but I checked 2 or 3 sites. So Hannah and Peninnah were the 2 wives that he had. God did not want them to have 2 wives. God's heart was that one man, one woman, one life, just like now. He didn't specifically punish it. It was legally a gray area. Morally, it was not a gray area. It was wrong. But anyway, in that day, this is what he had. It always, that is, polygamy, bred unhappiness and discord and dissension. Now, there's 2 women here and 1 man. This is a recipe, according to all the soap operas that I've tried not to watch, that this is going to go bad. Hannah, he loved more. And so his home life was stressful. To complicate matters, Peninnah was faithful and not faithful, fruitful and able to have children, and Hannah, who is a much better woman, did not. Spiritual, kind, and good Hannah was barren. That's a parallel to our church today. John Phillips says, why are some believers fruitful and why are some barren? Why do people that do almost the same thing get completely different responses? We don't always see that. Some barren people in the ministry or barren women that can't have babies would have been better mothers and better missionaries than all these people. But we don't know. Why does God bless one ministry and not another? Mark this. Here's a quote. The apparent lack of blessing does not mean that the first person is more spiritual. We have hot and cold missionary zones in my mind. Sometimes in Africa they'll get all excited, or South America, and village after village will be changed. And we've had people that used to be in Eastern Europe and these hard countries that were just as good of people that love God very much that would work for 10 years to get 2 people to start a Bible study. And you'd say, well, the first one was more dynamic. No, God just put them in a fertile field. We just don't know that. John Phillips gave an illustration in his life. He said that he said, frankly, I developed a wonderful sermon. It was a Bible sermon. That's why I'm going to say it was wonderful. Anyway, I laid it out. I gave it to a friend of mine. He preached it at a church, and 12 people came forward, indicating that God had used that message to bring them to faith in Christ. And then Dr. Phillips, who wrote the message, went there and nothing happened. Crickets. Nothing going on. And he said, I can't believe this. Warren Wiersbe, who just passed away a few years ago, he said, I don't know why in God's sovereignty, but I'm a better pediatrician than obstetrician. He didn't feel like he was a good soul winner, and his messages, although he wanted them to bring people to Christ, hardly ever did. But as far as growing in the truths of the Bible, he was very good. And he said, I don't know why this is true. God is sovereign. We are limited. Bottom line, he answers to no one. John chapter 3, verse 8. Literally, I was sitting in my backyard with the dogs waiting for Nancy to come home. And we were out playing in the yard, me watching them playing. And a big wind came through and just whipped all of these big fir trees that we have. And you really didn't see it. There was no cloud. I didn't know where it came from. And immediately in my mind, the wind bloweth where it listeth, and no man knoweth where it goeth. There is a sovereign element in salvation. There's an element for us too. But there is no doubt about this. It was so with Hannah and Elkanah, her husband. No explanation is given for her barrenness, but mark this, when she had a child, that child was worth 100 of worthless children coming from mean old Peninnah. So forget that. The Bible gives no record that any of Peninnah's children amounted to anything for God, but Hannah's little boy changed a nation and defined an age and affected an apostate and apathetic age. Number one, Hannah's life was marked with barrenness. You said, I don't want to have barrenness. I want to have fruitfulness. Well, of course you do, but a lot of people are barren. That's just how they start off. Number two, not only barrenness, it seems to get worse, bitterness. Look in 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 6. And her adversary also provoked her sore for to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. That's nice. This is a real nice lady to be around in your house. First, you have 2 people, both married, which is not God's plan. It's never going to work in the Bible. It's always a disaster. Then you, who are the better person, are not able to have kids. And the other woman just said, well, I guess I'll get some of my kids. You want to? Oh, I forgot. You don't have any. Oh, that's cruel. I mean, this is, remember, the original Mean Girls. These are the biblical Mean Girls. And this is what they do. Hannah was upset by her infertility. That's natural. She wanted children. And it didn't really help matters. God doesn't, here's a quote, doesn't move on the basis of our regret over not seeing more fruit in our lives or ministry. He has a whole different plan. Hannah wept. Now that's a deeper level. That's not just being mad at this mouthy other woman in the house who was so cruel. This is dealing with the Lord. She wanted something. She wanted a baby not to show off. She wanted a baby boy to change the nation they lived in. And she knew God would do it, but he had to do it through a woman. There's no man on earth that there has to be through the mother. Hannah's weeping and brokenness before the Lord were signs that such weeping and brokenness often precede fruitfulness and blessing both physically and spiritually. You know this verse, Psalm 126:6, he that goeth forth a weeping, bearing precious seed, shall doubtless come again rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. That's the idea. A lot of good spiritual work is preceded by a broken heart on our part. And remember that last week we talked about Billy Sunday's famous sermon, A Dry-Eyed Church in a Hell-Bound World. I think about that. I want my dad and my sister to be saved, but I don't cry about it as much as I used to. I mean, in a way, I guess that's natural. You've been praying for 20 years, but in a way that's wrong, because God's just as ready to save as he was back then. No soul saved, little wonder, would Billy Sunday say, no heart broken and no tears shed. Your children, my children, your grandchildren, my children, I hope they won't do this, but if they're living for the devil, dry eyes tell you I don't really worry about it like I think you might think I would. Shame on me. Maybe God is looking or waiting for a little sincerity, and then he'll act, and he can do it. When did you, this is an old thing, when did you last fast for somebody? James Dobson's getting really old. I think he's still on the radio, but boy, he was the answer to everything in the 80s and 90s when we raised our kids, and I appreciate Dr. Dobson. But he started fasting on Mondays for his children. He did a biblical fast, sun up to sundown. It wasn't 24 hours. And he quit after a while because his doctor said, I think he had diabetes. He said, this is not safe for you. I appreciate your heart, but don't do it. But that's the idea, is that you are focused on something that's more important even than eating. And eating, not only, all kidding aside, is very important just to stay alive, as well as an enjoyable thing. 1 Samuel 1:7 said Hannah did not eat. She showed her utter desperation and earnestness about those whom she wished God would impact. Look in 1 Samuel 1:9. So Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh and after they had drunk. Now Eli the priest sat on a seat by a post in the temple of the Lord. We find out later he was just half in and half out, just about gone. He fell over backwards later. The point is, while she praised, Eli snoozed. That could be us. Utterly unconcerned, spiritually indolent, lazy, uncaring. The high priest couldn't be bothered. A woman upset and crying, well, that's how women are. Don't bother me. I'm going to go back to sleep. Hannah was on the ball. She was sharp. She was looking for what God might do and hoped that God might do in their family. Eli was, again, not a very good priest. He wasn't much of a pastor to Israel, but God hadn't forgotten her. God knew all about her troubles. God knew all about this mean other woman in the house. God knew all about her barrenness. God knew about her bitterness. And you know what? These were allowed by God to drive her to himself. Her husband was pretty nice. He liked Hannah, but he had this other woman in the house, and it wasn't a very happy situation. She had people that were making fun of her. She was bitter. She was barren. She was broken. We wish, now mark this, we wish Peninnah, I think I'm saying that right, had been kind to Hannah, okay? Guess what? If she was and she said, you know, you're a good woman, there's lots more for you to do, she probably would have said, yes, I can be very helpful in the village. I can help other people. That's all right. No big deal if I have a child or not. But as mean as that other woman was, it just made her more and more cry out to God for a baby. And you know what? That baby was important. Last of the judges, first of the prophets, we needed, or the other way around, we need this baby to be born, and we need you, Hannah. And God allowing the barrenness and the bitterness and the meanness. That happens I heard Adrian Rogers talk about that. He said, oh, your kids have had a hard time, and sometimes there's families that you wish they had never met these people. And then he said, but wait a minute, if they hadn't, you'd not have that little grandbaby that you love so much. You better not talk like that. You better accept God overruling in his sovereignty some bad situations that nobody wanted to happen, but that he means to work out for good. And you just catch, I mean, when I heard that, I thought that is an important message. We really all need to be very careful not to overestimate man's ability and underestimate God's sovereignty in these situations. Shame on Peninnah's acid tongue and sour disposition, but God used it as a rough tool to drive a good woman, Hannah, to do his will and to change the fate of a nation. That's what it is. Just the same to accomplish his will. Not only bitterness, this is still, you think, give the woman a break here. Then brokenness. This is worse and worse. Barrenness, bitterness, and brokenness. Look in 1 Samuel 1:10. You think, well, she's real spiritual. She's probably praising the Lord for all this. Well, she's about like we are. Of course we're not. Nobody wants to be miserable, even though we know God uses it. 1 Samuel 1:10, she was in bitterness of soul, prayed unto the Lord, and wept sore. Okay, how many people have been there? All of us have been there. Is God working? He's always working. Would he have worked if Peninnah had been nice or Hannah didn't weep? Yeah, he would have, but he's working and driving and shepherding in a certain direction. That's a simple prayer. John Phillips takes a point out of it that I would have never seen. Here's the first time in Scripture that the word Lord there, remember it's usually associated with the name of the Lord, is from Jehovah Sabaoth, the Lord of warrior hosts. This is really spiritual warfare. She's thinking, God, I want you to get glory out of this, but I don't see how in the world you can. It's the most miserable situation I've ever been. John Phillips paraphrases that Hannah could cry out here, O Lord of warrior hosts, think of all the heavenly hosts you have. Think of the angels, the archangels, cherubim, seraphim, countless sons of light. Think of these mighty warrior hosts on high who hang on your every word. Rush to do your bidding. Think, too, of your human warrior host of the army of Israel. Many have already run their course. Lord, you have so many. Lord, spare me just one, but not just anyone. Let me, Lord, bring one of your crisis men into the world, a son who'll grow up to be a warrior and win victories for the people of God. Lord, I'd rather have one son like that than 100 sons who amount to nothing. Now that is a warrior woman. She is praying for God to intervene in the nation. In that day, especially a leader or a judge would have been a man, but they had to come from a woman and be raised, and they have to have the right woman. And it's the chicken and the egg. No, it's the woman first. The man never starts this. It's always a woman. Hannah prayed, 1 Samuel 1:11, she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt give thine handmaiden a man-child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. Remember that fellow here a few weeks ago about giving your children to the missions if God calls them? That's a hard thing to do. And that's what she did. She did it before there was even a baby. Her heart was 2 or 3 steps down the line. This is a spiritual person. This is a hero. Give me a baby boy. Now, we all love baby girls and baby boys, but she was thinking down to government, to warriors, to strengthening the nation spiritually and physically. He'll be, Hannah said to God, a warrior for you, and as a Nazirite all his life. Now, we know some of this because of Samson, but Nazirites never cut their hair, they never drank wine, they never touched a dead body. So his appearance, his appetites, and his affections were all laid on the altar. I didn't know this, most Nazirite vows were only temporary. There are only 3 lifelong Nazirites mentioned in the Bible: Samson, John the Baptist, and Samuel. That makes sense, I understand that. Here's capital letters. Hannah pledged herself to train her boy to be a lifelong Nazirite, that he would live with a consuming passion for God to the level of John the Baptist. That's wonderful. Bending a twig that would grow into a mighty oak, this was a tremendous commitment for her, as well as for the son that she should have and the son she should raise. Thank God for Hannah. Listen to what John Phillips says. This dear and desperate woman had more power with God in 55 words of prayer than an old worthless priest like Eli had in 55 years as the judge and priest of Israel. 1, 2, 3, barrenness, bitterness, brokenness. You say, well, it's a life of misery and woe. No, it just takes a while. God's designs are not that quick, but they take a while. The last one is blessedness. Hannah knew God answered her prayer. Not because Eli said so, mumbled some sort of prayer to get her to go away and to salve his conscience. Not because Eli said so, it was more sure than that. Look in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 18. She said, let thine handmaid find grace in thy sight. Well, that sounds like Mary, doesn't it, in Luke? So the woman went her way and did eat, and her countenance was no more sad. She knew this was going to happen. She knew that her prayers were going to be answered. And there was nothing wrong with having some good food and resting and smiling and confident in the future. Her future was as bright as the promises of God. That's the idea. She was thrilled. Verse 20, when it came to pass, when the time was come, about after Hannah had conceived, she bare a son, called his name Samuel, saying, I have asked him of the Lord. She had not, like we do, forget her pledge. I'm sure you don't do that. You're probably ashamed of me because I do. But I'll make all sorts of promises and pledges. It'd be best for me if I'd forget them. That's a sin, but it's not as bad as remembering them and saying, well, I don't think I'll do that. We need to learn, and I hope you have, I'm sure you have, that when we make a prayer, it's in a promise that when God fulfills it, we need to remember it. It's very important. I mean, we don't see these things, but they're true. Samuel, the name Samuel means asked of God. You talk about prayer prompters. What if you named your child, remember to pray? Remember to pray? Go get the trash. Remember to pray? Go play with the dog. Samuel asked of God. Do you think she forgot that she had asked of God, that Samuel was a gift from God, and that he answered her prayer? I don't think she could, unless she had some little nickname for him. She was not like we often are, forgetting her pledge to the Lord. Samuel means oft of God, and she remembered her promise each and every time she called his name. That'll kind of convict you on how to name your children. We learn not only of her fruitfulness, but of his nourishment. Look in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 22. Hannah went not up. She said unto her husband, I will not go up until the child be weaned. Then I'll bring him, that he may appear before the Lord, and there abide forever. How would you know that the time your child's a healthy child and the only time you were going to have with that child was until he was weaned? And then you were going to take him to the temple, to Eli, and that's what they had in the Old Testament. You were giving him the same as directly to the Lord, and probably not to see him very much after that. We know that. We learn of his nourishment. Sometimes young mothers stay home to nourish their babies. They should. I remember Dr. Wicker always said 6 weeks. I think the textbook always said 4. And I've always done what Dr. Wicker said. Just don't get in a big crowd. Don't go to the nursery. Stay home, 6 or 8 weeks, especially, these last 3 years. And you might stay home forever if you don't watch out. First things first, mothers, take care of your babies. But then, even at home, the mothers can begin by grounding them in the things of God. It showed in her life, in her faithfulness. She did all she could to guide her son's early steps in the right direction. And then the time came when she needed to remember her promise and take little Samuel asked of God to fulfill her promise to God. How could she, in Old Testament economy, literally, tangibly give her child to God? There was only one way. She took him to tabernacle and purposed to leave him with the high priest. Satan was not too happy about this. He laid landmines all along the way. Another wife, infertility, all these things. And you know what? God in his wisdom and in his power just guided her right past that. And Satan's just going, this is looking bad. This woman's going to do what God wanted her to do, and I am not happy. He probably whispered in one ear, remember, Eli's a jerk. You don't want to give him down to the tabernacle. Let him go to some good school, or maybe just do something else. Not everybody's called to be some Nazarite. They're a little bit out in left field. My goodness. You don't need to go overboard here. And Hannah just is marching along. She's just doing exactly what she's supposed to do. So how could, and then he said, Eli's such a jerk. Keep him at home. You'll do better. But Hannah and Elkanah slew a bullock, it says in 1 Samuel 1:25. Slain means blood. They put their child, as far as they could, under the blood, claimed coming victory of Calvary. For this child she had prayed, and to God she would deliver the answer to her prayer. She was sure, that she continued to pray daily. And that thing about his name, you're going to pray more than once a day, because you're going to call his name all the time. These names are important. Well, I'm almost done. Do you see? God's solution. This is very good. This is just like those John MacArthur books about 12 extraordinary women. That's a great book. When God wanted to do something. God's solution to Israel's apostasy was a baby boy. That's why abortion is about. It's wicked to murder people, and it's especially wicked to murder innocent people, but especially people that were going to grow up to be good and great for God and do something. It's not the baby's fault. They're fine, but what a misery to be any part of that. God's solution to Israel's apostasy was a baby boy. When he couldn't find a man, he thought, I'll raise one up from a baby, and I'll find me a godly woman who'll participate with me, and we're going to step aside, and we're going to look toward the future and trust God, and it's going to make all the difference in the world. When he couldn't find a man, he raised up a godly, praying woman who, like Mary, was going to be willing to be the handmaiden of the Lord. Now, people today would make fun of that. They would say there's a movie about the handmaidens or something, making fun about not having your rights and everything, and that's the world's response to that. This person, willing to bring God's solution into the world, willing to consecrate herself to the spiritual training of the child. When God, here's a quote, so wishes to bless the earth, he generally does it by sending his man into the midst of his people. I used to be on the development board at Mid-America Seminary in Memphis, and Gray Allison was the founder. He lived to be 92. He just died last year, but he was from Louisiana, and it was just fun to hear him preach. If he said it's kind of like J. Vernon McGee. If he read the phone book, you'd come forward. I mean, you just overwhelmed. You. It was just such fun. But this Dr. Allison, that's his name, Dr. Gray Allison, talked about this, about training and about blessing the earth. It means first, when God wishes to bless the earth, he does so by sending his man into the midst of people. Dr. Allison said we've got all sorts of corporate type level pulpit committees. He said, you know what your church needs? He went through all the things it didn't need. He said, you know what he needs? He said, he needs God's man. God's man. God's man. He said, God's man's the one that changed the church. And I thought, oh, that was so good. Well, same thing here. God's man had to come through God's woman. He needs God's woman. God's woman right here. Everybody's in their place. God's in the right place. Men are in the right place. Women are in the right place. Children are in the right place. Neighbors are in the right place. Strangers are in the right place. God has a wonderful positioning system to get everybody in the right place. That's what we need to obey. And that means he must first find his woman with her heart prepared and her heart ready. And here's the last point of prayer. God, send us such men and such women today. And that's the hope for our country and for our world. And how many people think if you went to the halls of power and education and said, you know what, we need godly men and godly women, they would laugh you out of there. Well, that's their problem. Who are you going to believe? A bunch of people like that or God's word? Well, we thank God for Hannah, and we'll study David next week. But this is a good one to encourage godly women. Sometimes Satan will whisper in their ear, oh, you're not important. Well, guess what? They are. Absolutely. Lord, thank you for today, and thank you for Hannah, and thank you for Susanna Wesley, and thank you for good godly women in our town, our nation, our church, and this Sunday school class. And help put them together in the right place for your glory and for our good. Amen.